Okay, now what we're going to be doing here is answer a question. Actually, this morning we were on this, and let me explain a little bit about what I taught this morning. First of all, it was in relation to what has transpired these past few days. And then I taught on call it a premonition, call it a sense that God gave me, but there was just simply a warning in my mind that was sounded, and that we're going to be talking about the third heaven, and that Paul was caught up to the third heaven, and as a result of it, he was assigned a messenger of Satan. And we related that to people like David and also to Job, in that things will begin to happen. And as we said, we had just no idea how close to home that was going to hit. But despite that, the third heaven is something we need to know about. And the question was, is it simply a lid, as it were, on our aquarium illustration, where God lifts it up and takes a peek at the inner contents and carryings on, as it were, of His creation? Or is it a distinct place between His essence and infinity and the second heaven and first heaven, the place where He dwells? And so we're going to investigate that. If the study is not as organized as normal, you will understand things have been a little bit hectic, but you will get the gist of it, and you will know and understand where we're coming from. So we're in the book of Amos, chapter 9. However, let's have a brief bit of review. First of all, in eternity past, the three members of the Godhead got together in order to identify the member of the Godhead that would actually be the preeminent one, that would actually do the ruling for the most part, and inherit as the Son of God the entire universe. The Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth, has given to His Son, Jesus Christ, the right to inherit it all. All right, with that, Jesus Christ therefore created it. All things were made by Him, for Him. By Him all things consist by the word of His power, and He is before all things. That means that He was part of the planning session. He is God, and He demonstrated His deity and omnipotence to the angels by creating this vast universe. Now, when He created, and this is the important thing to note with regard to the illustration of the third heaven, He created the heavens, stretching them out as a curtain or as a tent to dwell in. So I'm not going to go back to those verses, but with that, pointing to the third heaven there is a very definite opening and a canopy effect. Every single tent that I've seen always has that little roof over it, a little porch that comes out, a little post, and you have the doors. And that's what the third heaven is mainly. And it is the buffer between His infinity out there. Anything from creation outward is God. Anything from that curtain inward is creation. However, He did create it as a tent with an opening and with this little canopy. Now, I say little canopy. We're going to see that the third heaven actually is very, very immense. It has a lot of things in it contained. Now, not only does it have this curtain and tent aspect, in order to keep His light out of the innermost parts of creation, He also put a looking glass liner on it. And He also then set a compass on the face of the deep. Now that's important because God is going to dwell in the third heaven. And with any space or anything where you're going to travel, you have to have a means of direction. Where are you going to be able to find God in relation to this immensity called the universe? Well, north. You find the center of the universe, which is the earth, and you go from there north, and that's where the presence of God is going to be. Now somebody's going to say, okay, but now wait one second. Isn't God omnipresent? And the fact of the matter is, that is true. Whither shall I go from your spirit? If I go to the farthest star, you're there. If I go to the lowest hell, you're there. But the fact of the matter is, there are two doctrines we need to understand, and that is eminence and transcendence. All right? Now, transcendence means that if, let's get on earth. If I'm here on earth, this is me, where's God? Well, he's here as well. God, as to his essence, is everywhere. However, where else is God? Well, he's out here on this star. Whither shall I flee from thy presence? But that star is a zillion light years from Earth. How can that be? Well, it's the doctrine of eminence and transcendence. And it is also the doctrine of localization. God has so decreed that his presence is going to be localized so his creatures can orient to him. And so if I pray to God, where do I pray? Heaven. Jesus said, Our Father which is in heaven, and even in the dispensation of grace, where there is the throne of grace. Where's that throne located? Heaven. And so while we are on earth, and yes, there is a sense in which he, through his Spirit, lives in us, he has localized and materialized in the third heaven so that we can orient to him. And so you have to remember there are a lot of things to consider as we are factoring in. Is there a third heaven? Is it a boundaried place? And are there things contained therein? Now, here we are in Amos. Wait, let's go back. I didn't do much by way of review. We saw that there was the third heaven here, and the two thrones set up before any other thrones. The angels, therefore, were introduced to God the Son, given a gist of the plan, and then they themselves saw Jesus Christ create the contents of the universe. That's important. Now they realize he created them. They realize their obligation to the Creator, and now their obligation to rule and reign for him. Not only did he give him life, he gave him a home. So it's these angels, as it were, that saw the stars, that saw the third heaven, that saw the earth, that saw all the beauty, the precision, and so forth with the arguments for God, the biological argument, teleological, the ontological, the reasons for the existence of God, cosmological, and so forth. But as we're going, they also saw that he created thrones and dominions with principalities and powers to sit on them. And so what we have here is Jesus Christ being the one who is going to rule over the entire universe. Now, let's look at one more thing as we consider the third heaven. That's in Amos chapter 9. Let's go back to this one, where Amos the prophet makes a very unusual statement. It says, "It is he that buildeth his stories in the heaven." Now, all of us are familiar with stories in a building. If a building has a 10th floor, that is the 10th what? Story. And if you want to get up there, sure enough, your doctor is on the 10th floor or the 12th. You got to either take the elevator or climb the steps. And it says here, he builds, God is referring to, builds his stories in the heaven. Now, one thing about this is that the words, the heaven there, are what's called a plural absolute construct. It's taking more than one and considering them as only one. In other words, it's taking the entire universe and calling it the heaven as you see it. And that's, in fact, God calls this a heaven, God calls this part of heaven, God calls this a heaven, and he joins them together, and now we see an entirety. So we see the entire universe. And so Amos said, at this point, he began to build stories in there. Now, we know those stories to be the first, the second, and the third heaven. Now, let's just take a look at another place where that same concept is used. Holding your place here in Amos, if you're wise, you'll put a bookmark there and go back to the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 6. Noah certainly will forgive me. Genesis chapter 6 and verse number 16. The ark is a picture of God's creation in that he took one ark, but how many stories are in the ark? 3. Verse number 16, a window shalt thou make to the ark, a cubit shalt thou finish it above. And note there again, there is an above to the ark, and there is a beneath to the ark. And anybody here, we've got quite a few sailors, you do understand the importance of the top part of the ship being above water and the bottom part of the ship being underwater. Otherwise, you are in great trouble. And that's what it is. You'll finish the window above. Here's the window up here. And the door of the ark you will set in the side thereof with lower, second, and third stories. You'll make it. He builds his stories in the heaven. How many heavens are there in the universe? There are 3 of them, and they're built in, and they're all identified so that you can go to story 1 or story 2 or story 3 and be able to orient to it. Just as Noah had a bottom or a lower, a second, and a third story. All of them were the ark, but there were distinct places for the animals. I can just imagine that the bigger, heavier animals were on the first floor, and then lighter as you went on up. Okay, let's go from here to the book of Ezekiel. Book of Ezekiel, chapter 48. Ezekiel chapter 48. 42 is what I wanted, not 48. And we'll start here with verse number 3. It has to do with the temple and some of the buildings and that sort of thing that are part of it. And if you'll look here at verse number 3 in Ezekiel 42, over against the 20 cubits, which were for an inner court, and over against the pavement, which was for the outer court, was gallery against gallery in 3 stories. And before the chambers, and it talks about that and the various doors, and it talks about an upper chamber that were shorter, and the galleries were higher than these, and there was a lower, and there was a middlemost part of the building. And so you had, this was more or less in a pyramid effect, where you had a base, which was considered story 1, and you had a middlemost part of it, which was considered story 2, and you had a pinnacle, which was considered story 3. So all of these things are letting us know, therefore, that God himself took a universe And this plural construct, plural absolute construct says there are many parts to it, but we're going to look at it first as one. And then he took it and built 3 stories in it. He builds his stories in the one universe or one heaven, so that 3 are now distinguished. Let's go back to Amos and look at something else here. Now, we showed this morning that there were some aspects of things on earth that are duplicated or replicated in heaven. For example, you get the Lord Jesus Christ. He has just recreated, the Spirit has just recreated the earth, and he made man. And the wording changed from creation to him planting a garden. And the Lord planted a garden. And the picture is this, that God went to the store in the third heaven, and he got some specific plants there that he wanted, including the tree of life. And he brought these things down to the earth, and he is the one with a spade now, shoveling and putting his hands in the dirt and the soil. And the man's, well, what are you doing, God? You just speak it into existence. No, he himself planted this garden and put specific types of plants there from the third heaven, because those same plants he put in the garden were in existence in the Edenic situation in the third heaven, including the tree of life that was there. So you now had a paradise on earth restored, which was in keeping with the paradise in the third heaven. Now, I said that just simply to say this: where did the water come from that was found on the earth? How did he get it here? Note, if you will, it says, he hath founded his troop in the earth, he that calleth for the waters of the sea, and poureth them out upon the face of the earth. Now wait one second. He called for the waters of the sea, and he poured them out on the face of the earth? Where do these waters come from? Well, we believe that they came from the third heaven, that everything we have here on earth by way of an atmosphere is duplicated there, or I should say, our atmosphere is modeled after the third heaven. We're going to see that the third heaven has clouds and mountains. It has water. It has plants. It has people. It has buildings, and so forth, and that it is a distinct place. So let's move from this point up to the book of Luke, chapter 1. Now, please remember, this is going to take a little while to investigate all of the various references to prove that heaven is exactly as we have drawn it here. Well, maybe a little better. You want to say, dear God, may it be a lot better. But the first thing we need to do in Luke chapter 1, look at verse number 32. He shall be called great, and he shall be called the Son of the what? Highest. Okay? Now, highest is a relative term. You've got something that is high, something, therefore, that is higher than that, and then what? The highest. Now, God is called the highest. And therefore, if he is the highest, where must he be located? In the highest. Let's look at Luke chapter 2, verse number 14, where the angels come down to serenade the shepherds, telling about the Lord Jesus Christ and his birth. And it says, glory to God. Where is he located? In the highest. No, he's not high, that is the first heaven, the atmosphere. He's not higher, the second heaven, space. God is located in the highest. The highest what? The highest heaven. The highest story. a definite place where you can go where the very presence of God is seen. All right, we have another verse of Scripture. Let's go to Luke 19 that tells pretty much the very same thing. Luke chapter 19 and verse number 38. Saying, "Blessed be the King that comes in the name of the Lord." Now, the King is one who is going to come from the highest down to earth. He's going to be king over all the earth. Who's going to send him? God in the highest God in the highest heaven. And let's read the rest of the verse. Blessed is the King that comes in the name of the Lord. The King's God the Son, the Lord is God the Father. Peace in heaven, glory to God in the highest. Now, obviously, this is not the first heaven or the second heaven. It has to be in the third heaven. Now, that word itself is very important. It is the word in. I'll put it over here let's put it here, okay? When you put something in something else, it means it is in a contained space. It is in something that has boundaries. You came from the outside through that door, where? Into the church, so that you've got walls around you and a refuge and a shelter and a structure and that type of thing. And so God is in a very definite place. All right, let's go from here to Isaiah 57. Isaiah 57. In verse number 15. Eternity. Making an arrow to the outside of the tent. And it says in verse number 15, "For thus saith the high and lofty one." Again, a reference to his title, the fact of where he's located, the fact of where you can find God, where you can come into the very presence of God in the third heaven. But he lets us know that this is not the only place where he is. And that as in keeping with the very person of God, or the essence of God, and the universe itself, it's vast to us. It's not big to him. It's as a tent to dwell in to him. But as far as God himself is concerned, read the rest of the verse. "The high and lofty one that inhabits eternity." And so therefore, there's got to be a buffer between his eternality, his infinity, his light, his essence, and where he is going to show up here on earth in order for his creatures to orient to him. Okay, let's come then to the book of Hebrews, chapter 9. Hebrews chapter 9. In Hebrews 9, let's look at verse number 23, first of all. "It was therefore necessary that the patterns of the things in the heavens," now we're going to begin investigating just a little bit, the fact that in the third heaven, God has a mountain and a city and a temple. God has a tabernacle. And that in that tabernacle in the third heaven, there were things that were in the tabernacle on earth. And God gave to Moses the blueprint for the tabernacle on earth that were the very same things that were in the third heaven. They weren't floating out on space. They weren't out on some planet in the second heaven. They were located in the third heaven. So let's look here. It was therefore necessary that the patterns, those on earth, of things in the heavens should be purified with these, but the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices. For Christ is not entered into the holy places made with hands. Note the word entered. The third heaven is a contained place because you have to enter it. You can only enter a structure. If the third heaven were a lid you take off, what would be there but God himself? He inhabits eternity. God is all around the universe. And that's why he takes great pains not to let his light shine in and to just let his own essence be localized in one place. Other than that, the universe would be destroyed at the very essence of God. We could not stand the essence of God. He restrains, as it were, himself. As a matter of fact, that's why there are clouds in the third heaven, to protect the angels and eventually us from seeing the light of his glory, which would absolutely destroy us, according to Paul. But that's coming up. Verse number 24, Christ is not entered into the holy places made with hands, which are the figures of the true. See, there's a replication and there's the truth. There are those made with human hands. There are those made with the original creation. The third heaven was created by Jesus Christ without hands. He spoke them into existence. Note these words, but into heaven itself. Now, autos is the Greek word used reflexively, saying when you use that word into heaven itself, in the motor itself, in the church itself, you're talking about the church proper or motor proper. You understand that the idea, the conception of a church when you use the word itself, and it's there in the Greek. And so he's talking about into heaven itself, which X's out the first heaven, X's out the second heaven, and so when Jesus Christ went up, he passed through the heavens into a specific place, heaven itself. Now, why does he use that particular terminology? Because the last part of verse 24, now to appear in the presence of God for us. Where's God? Where Jesus Christ entered into, in the third heaven. You see, why didn't he come into the presence of God in the first heaven? Because God's localization was not there. Why, when he passed through Jacob's ladder, why didn't he come into the presence of God? Because God's presence was not there. Where did he have to go to find God to enter into his presence? The third heaven. He entered the third heaven into the presence of God. He entered into the holy places. What is that holy place? The temple of God in the third heaven. Now, let's go back to 1 Kings. 1 Kings chapter 8. First Kings chapter 8. Hope I can find it here. And we're going to begin reading some things with regard to how Solomon describes God. Now let's just go back to these other illustrations here. How Solomon describes God and the temple on earth and the universe and the third heaven. Let's get some nomenclature there. Let's go to verse number 27. And it says there, but will God indeed dwell on earth? Now, he had just made the temple. He had just invited God to come down here and live in this house. But note what he says, will God indeed dwell on earth? Behold, the heaven. Now, it's got the definite article in it in the Hebrew, and that definite article, just like other definite articles, identifies, specifies. In the Greek, it's accusative. It points right to something. You could point to a person and say, you, and it's like the, the one, the teacher, the this, that, and the other. And it identifies which one you are talking about. In this particular case, the heaven is speaking of the second heaven. That can't contain God. But note what else he says. And there's another definite article, the heaven of heavens. Now, which one do you suppose that is? That's the third heaven. The heaven of heaven. You've got a first heaven here, which is where the house he's talking about is located. How are you going to dwell? How's this house going to contain God? Behold, and he's looking up, the heavens, speaking of stellar space. The entire universe can't contain God. God surrounds the universe and inhabits eternity. But then he makes this statement, behold, the heaven of heavens, that is the third heaven, cannot contain thee. Now, do you know what a container is? It's something that holds other things in. That's what a container is. Here's an illustration. A few months ago, Jackie Yancey brought in some jams and jellies, and she had them in those what are those special mason jars? Okay, what is that? Well, that's a container. Could you imagine if she had to carry that jelly in her hands without putting it? I mean, how much could she have gotten in here? It would have fallen off and should have left the trail all the way out to her car and into the church. What does she have to have in order to have that jelly in one place? She had to have a container. What is the first heaven? It's a container around the earth. What is the second heaven? It's a container around the universe. What is the third heaven? A container. What does Solomon say about it? It can't contain you. God is all around the universe. But the point is, God is contained therein because that's where God lives. Now, how do I know that? Let's move on down here. Let's go to verse number 29. That your eyes may be open toward this house night and day, and toward the place of which thou hast said, my name shall be there. Now it's the temple on earth. That thou mightest hearken to the prayer which thy servant shall make toward this place. And hearken thou to the supplication of thy servant and of thy people Israel, when they shall pray toward this place. Thou shalt hear in heaven thy dwelling place. Where did Jesus go to find the presence of God? The third heaven. He had to pass through the heavens to get up there. And Solomon says that is a container, that God lives there, but it can't contain him all, but yet he still lives there because that's where the presence of God is there. And it is specified as the place where God lives. It's thy dwelling place. And so it is a very definite place with boundaries, an atmosphere. If you've seen Walt Disney, he had this conception years before his time, where he was going to put cities under the ocean, and above it was this big glass container that'd be anchored into the ocean, and they would take the water out of it, put air in it, and people would be able to live under the ocean and just do everything else they do above the ocean. I mean, it's futuristic, but it's possible. And as a matter of fact, they were even thinking of doing things like that on the moon, to colonize the moon and inhabit the moon. It's just futuristic, but that's how it's going to happen. You're going to have a container with air and forming an atmosphere. That's exactly what God has done here. The only difference is it's not a glass canopy. It is a closed-off thing where he enters here. And it's called his dwelling place. All right. Let's go from here to Deuteronomy chapter 4. Deuteronomy chapter 4. And Deuteronomy chapter 4, and let's look at verse number 39. Know therefore this day, and consider it in your heart, that the Lord, he is God in heaven above and upon the earth beneath. There is none else. And so you've got another orientation here of where you find the third heaven. It's always above. And where you find the earth is always beneath the third heaven. Now, what significance does this have? Let's turn from this point to Deuteronomy chapter 32. Deuteronomy chapter 32. And in chapter 32, we have what is tantamount to the lowest place in the universe. And this is extremely important in recognizing the fact that the earth, therefore, is planned by God to be the very center of the universe. Because he talks about the third heaven up above being the highest, and then he talks about the lowest point. So that any place you can go from the sides of this universe. And by the way, does anybody recognize this particular geometric figure in a study we've done before? Where have you seen this as a base for something? Wednesday nights? The Great Pyramid? Remember we studied the Great Pyramid as to its base? And that we believe that angels were the ones who designed the Great Pyramid, and the angels before they fell understood the concept of how God built the universe, and that was incorporated into the building of the Great Pyramid, whether before or after the recreation, that the angels were involved in it either way, the sons of the Nephilim or the others, and that they understood it to be just like this. With regard to the circle around the base, with regard to the very measurements indicating the precession of the equinox, and the measurements indicating the square, and looking toward the universe, that's how God created the universe. You look at the Great Pyramid, and that's how it's built. Because God even built pyramids into the universe. So there's a circle, there's a square, there's pyramids, and that brings us to the point that the earth is the center of the universe. You go from here, north, south, east, or west, the earth, designed by God, is to be in the center. All right? So let's go, where did I say we were? Chapter 32. Thank you. I did say that. And verse number 22. It says, "For a fire is kindled in mine anger, and it shall burn to the lowest hell." So, now we have another orientation. God is the highest. The furthest away from God is the lowest. If you want to get into his presence, you go up there. And Jesus Christ came into the localized presence of God in the third heaven, his dwelling place. But if you want to be punished, God is going to send you away from his presence to the lowest point, and that, of course, is in Tartarus, or the lowest hell and the lowest parts of the earth. Let's continue running some verses along these lines. Psalms 86. Psalms 86. And verse number 13. You understand that there are compartments to hell. Not all of the compartments are punitive. There is a compartment that is called paradise. That has been evacuated now, but the other compartments are fully operational, functioning as we speak. But David says, verse 13, "For great is your mercy toward me. Thou hast delivered my soul from the lowest hell." Hell being a specific place where people can go, where life is carried on to whatever degree, good or bad. Angels, the angels that sinned, became incarnate, are in Tartarus, actually the lowest point of hell. That's part of what we're studying on lunar lunacy, and we'll continue that. Let's move now to the book of Ephesians. The book of Ephesians, chapter 4. Now, here's how it went. On the day that Jesus Christ died, under the full moon of Aviv 15th, he descended. Verse number 9 says, "Now he that ascended, what is it?" This is Ephesians 4:9. "What is it but that he also descended first unto the lower parts of the earth?" He went to a place. He went to a contained place. The earth is surrounding it. The oceans are surrounding it. It has gates to it. We've studied those things. But he that descended is the same also that ascended far above all heavens. That's the third heaven. That's where the presence of God is. He went up through the first and the second with all the other atmospheres and the planets in the second heaven. And all of those heavens now, he went up to the third heaven and sat down at the right hand of God there on that throne, because that's where he now is going to be localized. He ascended far up above all heavens. Now, what is the point? Simply this: that he went up from the first heaven through the second heavens into the third heaven, and he sat down on the right hand of the throne of God. Come to Hebrews chapter 7. Hebrews chapter 7. And verse number 26. "For such an high priest became us, who is holy, harmless, undefiled, separate from sinners, made higher than the heavens." Why? What did he do? Come here to chapter 4, verse number 14. "Seeing then that we have a great high priest that has passed into the heavens," diarchomai. Diarchomai means that he went from a terminal point. That's what we call bus terminals, train terminals. A terminal actually is a starting point, and you start there. And he went up through the heavens, and that's what it means to pass through, diarchomai, but to get to another terminal point. Where was that? The third heaven. He passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God. Let us hold fast our profession. We just read in chapter 9 that Jesus Christ appeared in heaven itself to appear in the presence of God for us. Okay, let's begin while we're here in Hebrews, to look at some of the contents of the third heaven. Hebrews chapter 12. We're almost finished with the time on our tape. You'll get to go home just a little early. I don't hear any amens. Thank you for sparing my feelings. Yay, we have to go home early. Whoopee. Okay. Verse number 22. But ye are come unto Mount Zion. Well, where is this Mount Zion? You say, Pastor, it's on the earth. Not this one. Mount Zion here is the same mount of the congregation that we saw what person aspire to before man was even created. Remember, he said, I will also sit in the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. Hold your place here and let's look at the earthly Mount Zion. Go to Psalms 48. Psalms 48. Just sing this as a chorus. Great is the Lord, greatly to be praised. City of our God, the mountain of his holiness. Mount Zion. All right? Verse number 1 of Psalms 48. You held your place. Great is the Lord, greatly to be praised in the city of our God. Now this city is on earth. It's Jerusalem. The city of the great king is Jerusalem. In the mountain of his holiness. Which one is that? Well, beautiful for situation. The joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great king. Now remember what we contend, that God has duplicated the third heaven on earth.